Alrighty, thank you guys for attending the October 2023 Barrier Busters meeting. Just a quick overview of what our agenda will be like for today. Danielle Kelly is going to start us off with just kind of some winter plan updates really quick. And then Bridget has a little bit to share regarding a talent pipeline survey. And then Andrew Kramer is going to kind of wrap us up as far as community presenters with community housing prioritization. And then lastly, I will give an update regarding our Barrier Busters funding.
Hey, Emily, there was background noise, so I muted everybody. You might want to unmute yourself if you haven't already.
Daniel, you're good whenever you're ready to present.
Okay, sure thing. Sorry, yeah, there was a lot of background noise. Yeah, hi everybody. Glad to be here. Dan Kelly with the Shelter Association, aka the Delana Center. Just wanted to share briefly. It's not like a written update. We will have something going out from the Winter Task Force really soon. Hopefully later this week, if not early next week at the latest. Just wanted to share about winter planning that's going on right now on the sheltering front. So both for individuals and families. Many of you might be aware that there was a task force formed earlier this summer. Actually, honestly, going back to the spring, because last year in the winter months, we saw increased need for both individuals and families. There were a number of efforts that happened last year to try to address this, but we wanted to be more proactive this year. So we started this task force that's been meeting throughout the spring, summer, and now fall to try to come up with a stronger plan for this winter and or a strong plan for this winter, and also make recommendations to partners about other actions we could take. There's over 20 organizations involved, local municipalities, local government, a lot of nonprofit organizations, community action groups. It's a whole wide gamut. I won't go into detail, but other than to say that we're hoping to finalize our report and it'll go out really broadly to the community, including the Barrier Busters group. Like I said, later this week or early next week. The efforts for this winter are going to center around trying to, I guess, most at the highest level, lift up enough shelter capacity so that we're able to serve everyone in need. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. On the individual then, the shelter takes on the majority of that task. And what we do is we'll have a variety of sites throughout the community, not just the Delana Center. We open up a rotational site. We have a site we're trying to lift up in Ypsilanti that we've got a partnership with the city of Ypsilanti on. And that's both day and overnight, having multiple sites, because we anticipate an increased need this winter again. And then on the families front, the goal broadly is to try to be proactive about stopping eviction, try to support more eviction prevention dollars, do a lot of good, strong diversion work, which what that is when folks are on the brink of homelessness or just experiencing it, it's seeing what resources they may have in their lives that are available to try to stop that from happening. Could be that they could go to a cousin, but that cousin wants them to have more food security so they can handle their own food when they're there. So maybe if we can figure out the food piece, they can go stay with the cousin. Broadly, that's how diversion works. And then finally, for families, we'll plan to have some limited hoteling for those with the highest needs, those with medical vulnerabilities or other high level of need. And then also through Alpha House and SOS, congregate or non-congregate emergency sheltering options available. So just stay tuned for the report, but I just wanted to share broadly because I know it's starting to get cold and there might be a lot of questions from the community about how to work with folks who are housing insecure or on the streets. And we'll have more to follow. I know on the individual's end, we'll have our information sheet, which breaks down all the sites coming out in the next week or so. Yeah, and that's just a really broad update about winter sheltering for this winter for individuals and families. Happy to answer any questions, I guess, if we have time.
We have a couple minutes if anyone has any questions. If not, thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And if anyone wants to reach out with any questions offline, I'll drop my email in the chat.
Perfect. Bridget, you are next whenever you're ready.
Thanks so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to get us started, if that's okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here, and I'm here to talk a little bit about a research project that's ongoing right now to explore and really illuminate the people who identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are working in our local human services ecosystem. And I'm here to ask for your participation. So I want to walk you through a little bit of information, and hopefully this will give you the information that you need to not only complete the survey, but to share out the information about how to participate in this important community-based research project with your colleagues. And so we know United Way of Washington County, which is now United Way for Southeastern Michigan, we are really focused on creating the conditions where your zip code no longer predicts your opportunity in life. And as part of that, we know that that happens through partnerships with local human service organizations and everybody employed with organizations on this call who are really working to address the downstream consequences of racism, poverty, and trauma. One of the things that we're really interested in building up is the pipeline of talent from Black, Indigenous, and people of color to lead in the local human services ecosystem space. We know that there exists a leadership gap locally, and that is representative of what's happening nationally. And so what we want to do is we want to conduct this research project to get information about who's working in the sector, to understand where we're at in terms of the talent pipeline, who's working in these spaces. And then from that, we can determine where we need to go as a community to ensure that our human services ecosystem is as diverse as the individuals and families whom we're all serving in Washington County. And so to do that, we're partnering with the Ginsberg Center at the University of Michigan. They've assembled a team of PhD students to help us with this research project to really be leading in this work. And so you may have gotten an email from me or one of my colleagues with a survey has been open. And so we want to remind folks that this survey is here. And we have a team of folks who are committed to doing a bunch of analysis and then some direct engagement with folks. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that. We know that we need to know more about the presence of individuals who identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are working in the sector. This is really so that we can understand where we stand, where the inequities are, and where the gaps are, and so that we can generate a plan so that we have information. There is no representative data around who's working in the sector at present, as there is in private industry. There's no corollary, there's no place where you can get that information. So we figured we should probably shine a flashlight on that and understand current state. We are committed to sharing these results back to the community, and we're hoping for broad and deep participation, not just from leadership, but from frontline staff. And so what the team at the University of Michigan is going to be doing is to prepare out a report, which is the thing that you probably don't want to spend your time reading, and then holding a series of community engagements so that we can understand and analyze the findings and figure out what does this mean for us? What does this mean for you based on where you sit in the local human services ecosystem? So we're doing a survey right now. The survey is open. My ask to all of you is to complete the survey. And so I'm going to be dropping in the link before the end of my presentation. And then we're also going to go a little bit deeper based on those findings, right? Right now, in terms of the survey response rate, we've been hearing mostly from people who occupy leadership positions within local nonprofits. And while that's really important, we're really hoping to shed light on the experiences of frontline staff. And so that would be individuals who are not at the executive level or at the C-suite in organizations, to really understand their perspectives around how they got into their current role, what the conditions are like, and how they identify. We're going to be doing some focus groups based on who responds to the survey, and then some one-on-one interviews to go a little bit deeper. Throughout this process, we are going to be incentivizing participation. And so if you choose to participate in any of these, the survey, if you're invited to a focus group, if you get tapped for an individual interview, we're going to be delivering Meyer gift cards to folks just as a way to acknowledge that you had to put some skin in the game and contribute some time to participate and deliver this information back to us about our community and your experience in the human services sector. This is an IRB. We do have IRB approval for this research project. And so there's another level of diligence with all of the data that we're collecting on folks. So there's this special designation, and it does also mean that you have to sign a consent form, an electronic consent form. So I just need to be transparent about that. You can see our ultimate timeline. We're working with by semester as we're working with graduate students, but we're really hoping by the spring of next year to have something that folks can digest and react to about the current composition of the human services sector in Washtenaw County. So I'm going to be sharing the links to the survey again. The data is only as good as who's opted in to participate and share their perspective and their experience with us. Your voice is really important. We know that there's a gap in knowledge, and we don't have a complete picture on who's working in the sector right now, and that's really important to really understand who's working in our sector, why folks are choosing to work in our sector, perhaps why they're choicing out, their perceptions around the presence of a talent pipeline, pathways into leadership based on their identity and experience. And so I invite you all to spend 10 minutes to complete that survey. I can provide the link right now in the chat before I stop sharing my screen. If you have any questions, we have a standard email address set up that you can query us, so you can feel free to submit questions about the survey itself, or if you have any questions that you can direct them to me through this email address. And I want to thank you in advance for completing yet another survey. I think that we're inundated by surveys, and so I just want to acknowledge that, and thank you for your contributions to the sector and for sharing your experience via the survey. Back over to you, Moon and team. I'm going to stop sharing and drop those links into the chat. And of course, if folks have any questions, I'm happy to answer those right now.
I guess I'm muted still and I'm talking. Thanks, Bridget. I'll give everyone a couple minutes if they have questions for you.
Right on. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. All righty, Andrew is up next with his community housing prioritization.
Well, good morning or afternoon, morning, good grief. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. I'm going to share my screen here. So I was asked to come here today. My name is Andrew Kramer. I'm part of the homelessness or continuum of care team here at the Office of Community and Economic Development. And I was asked to come here today to share a little bit about our Community Housing Prioritization Committee, which we call it CHIP. Don't worry about the committee name. What's important, the takeaway here is what this is really about is how our community allocates its limited resources to people experiencing homelessness. So I'm going to just go ahead and dive into it, but I'd love for this to be as interactive as possible. Please stop me if something doesn't make sense, or you have any questions or comments. I know we've also got some other folks here from the homelessness system, and so feel free to chime in if you feel like you've got some helpful detail. So what are we talking about with CHIP? It's part of our continuum of care, and by continuum of care, that's basically all the organizations that assist people experiencing homelessness. I'll talk more about that in just a second. And as a continuum of care, we have to figure out how to assist everybody we know about experiencing homelessness. And one of the ways we do that is we maintain a by name list of people experiencing homelessness. Now, there are a lot of definitions of homelessness out there. I want to specify we use the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development definition of homelessness, which means people who don't have a fixed or permanent residence or spending the night in a place not meant for human habitation. So everyone we know who meets that category, we keep a list of by name, and we keep kind of data about them. And one of the key pieces of data is like an assessment score. I'll talk a little bit about that. And we use that list as a community through this committee. We use this to make resources when we have permanent housing resources available. So we have, a large number of funds that are devoted towards permanently housing people, and we make sure that we allocate those according to the way our community has decided, which is what I'm going to kind of describe here. So why do we do this? We started this for a few reasons, and this has been going on since about 2014. We've been sort of doing it this way. One is, as part of our kind of work with the state and funding that we receive, we're required to use a tool called the VI SPDAT. Don't worry about it, what it stands for. It's a tool that we use to assess people experiencing homelessness. It tells us a couple things. One of the things it tells us is what kind of service would be appropriate. So if we just had all the resources in the world, would we give this person what we call rapid rehousing? Would we give them what we call permanent supportive housing? Would we recommend that maybe they get just tap into some of our prevention resources and find a place themselves? And another thing it's intended to tell us is kind of how vulnerable someone is in their homelessness. So it's intended to give us a sense kind of who's more at risk of negative impacts of homelessness. And I'm specifically talking about, dangers to mental health or physical health. And so we use this tool as a community, the entire state does, to kind of help us prioritize people. At the same time, MSHDA was asking us to start using this tool. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, who provides most of our funding here for homelessness assistance, they wanted us to start prioritizing what we call chronically homeless households. It's part of a kind of shift generally overall across the country in philosophy. And the idea is overall, we want our resources to be targeted towards the people who are most in need, who are most vulnerable. And so chronic homelessness is a definition we use to help us prioritize that. The simplest way to think about chronic homelessness is that occurs when someone who has a lifelong disability or lasting disability also experiences homelessness for a year or more out of the past 3. Another reason we started CHIP is because we had this brand new rapid rehousing grant back in 2014. I guess it's not so brand new anymore. We're on entering our 10th year. Rapid rehousing is our biggest program for families. We don't have as much on the individual side. It's a short-term subsidy. Generally, we try to target it towards 6 months, and it comes with supportive services over those 6 months. And the idea is we'll try to quickly help a family get housed. That's the rapid part, and then help them stabilize, and then gradually taper off assistance. And hopefully at that point, they'll be in a good place to continue the rent. Now, we don't taper it off if they're not in a good place. We work with the family to make sure it's appropriate. But that's one of the resources we have. So that started in 2014, and we needed a way to figure out how to fairly allocate that new resource. And then finally, we joined something called Built for Zero. And oops, I'm trying to get rid of all this stuff. There we go. No, go away. And that was in 2015. We're part of this nationwide movement. And the idea is we really do believe that homelessness is a solvable problem. And we believe that if we focus on the hardest people to serve, and we set strong goals and we're rigorous about how we accomplish those goals, how we evaluate ourselves, that we can get to a place where we can make homelessness rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. And so that really put our community with the focus kind of on chronic and veteran populations as well. So that's some of the history. So what does CHIP look like? So CHIP is a bi-weekly meeting. We meet twice a month. And we bring together a whole bunch of agencies. The idea is to kind of bring together everybody who could be touching any of the clients on our list. So we bring together folks from our coordinated entry system, from our call center at Hawk, as well as we've got like a hotel case managers that attend some of the meetings for our family hotel program, and representatives from SOS and the Shelter Association who are part of our coordinated entry. We've got our street outreach team there who works directly with people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. We have representatives from all our emergency shelters who are temporarily housing families, as well as our transitional housing, which is a resource that really only exists in our community for veterans or youth, but they're represented as well. Rapid rehousing, which I mentioned earlier, that's one of our permanent housing resources. So this is like the line between transitional housing and rapid rehousing is sort of the shift between our emergency response and our permanent resources. So rapid rehousing is that short-term subsidy with short-term services. Permanent supportive housing is the other resource we offer. It's our highest level of care. It's exactly what it sounds like. Permanent ongoing subsidy with no end. Permanent ongoing supportive services. We reserve these for people experiencing chronic homelessness. If we get to a point where we don't have people experiencing chronic homelessness, we will be able to serve other people with a disability. We also have our public housing authorities participating in this process, the Ann Arbor Housing Commission, Ypsilanti Housing Commission. And then depending on our population, because we actually do divide the meeting up into a veterans and individuals and a family portion. We have the Veterans Association and we have DHHS. And so within all of this are like kind of all the agencies. I've mentioned a few of them, like the Shelter Association and SOS. We also have IHN. We've got Ozone House. We've got Safe House. I'm going to be forgetting some folks. I shouldn't have started listing people. Just like everybody you could imagine, if you work directly with homeless people, we sort of draw a circle at that point. Like if you're not an agency that's like kind of directly part of our system, not because we don't want to like have more information from folks, but because all of this is powered, as you could imagine, by a rather complicated sharing agreement that we as a system kind of all have, because we talk about clients by name in this meeting, and so we have to make sure we have kind of Loctite releases and all that sort of stuff. CHIP is generally facilitated by two agencies. OCED kind of plays a big role right now since we've been taken over Hawk, the call center. And so we facilitate the meeting, we plan the meeting. The Washington Housing Alliance is also a huge part of this, maintaining the agency contacts, keeping up with the notes, maintaining the referral contacts, all that stuff. Landlord discussions, they maintain a landlord. They've got like a landlord focus group right now that's really working with them. They're just amazing at what they do to kind of help our housing system liaise with landlords and that sort of thing. So they also play like a key role. And so we've got kind of a lot of housing expertise around the table at CHIP. The one thing we sort of don't have that we love and we talk about every so often, we try to wrestle with, like, how do we get this in there, are people with the actual lived experience, but it's sort of difficult with all the confidentiality stuff. But it would be actually really great to also have input from folks who really have this life experience of homelessness as well. So we follow some guiding principles. But before I talk, I mean, you can read all those while I'm talking. Before I get into that, I'm realizing this presentation sort of came out of an orientation I do for new CHIP members. And what it doesn't really include is like, what does a CHIP meeting look like? So at the beginning of the meeting, we do some introductions, and then we go into, if there's some data, like monthly, we'll have some data. And then what we do is we go in and we literally go through the list by name. We bring up everyone. Some of the updates we've gotten already by email, but we'll still kind of spend some time on them during the meeting. What we want to try to do is get the best understanding of what's going on with people, and particularly in relation to their housing. So what's going on? Are they in shelter right now? Are they unsheltered? Are they facing any particularly imminent dangers or barriers? What are the barriers they're facing to housing? Can we resolve any of those without resources while they're waiting? Or because we frankly don't have enough resources to serve everyone? And the goal is to kind of get that list as up to date as possible. We'll add people who maybe we might be missing. And then we'll rank it according to our community priorities. And I'm going to talk directly about those in a little bit. And then we use that list to make referrals for any openings we have. Now, rapid rehousing is one of the programs that we have. Those openings like kind of recur on a ongoing basis. So as soon as someone leaves that program, we can open up a new spot basically for another family. You know, it's kind of up to the level of our case management, how many kind of case management slots we have. And so that like we kind of have a constant renewing supply. Our permanent supportive housing, unfortunately, is a lot rarer because it's permanent. When we allocate that to somebody, we're intending them to be there for a long time. People do move on. Some people do stabilize and move on to other housing. In general, that takes 4 to 5 years on average. Which isn't surprising that it takes kind of a long time for people who have a long experience of homelessness and also have a disability. But it means that we don't have those open up as often, and you know, unless we're developing new homelessness. As a result of kind of both of those things, the limit of our case management on the rapid rehousing side and just the limit of available units on the permanent supportive housing side, a big part of CHIP is, you know, by prioritizing people is we have to figure out how to allocate not enough resources to the people who, as I said, we feel are the most vulnerable, the most at risk, and the highest need. And, you know, obviously that's not an easy task. And it's also one that we don't take lightly. It's you know, our decisions impact people. We recognize the power that our decisions make. It's one of the reasons we try to use these objective tools like the VIS for that as best we can and other data. And so that's part of why we have these like guiding principles. It's because this is really a moral task we have to do as a CHIP committee. And I really think of like CHIP as like kind of the beating heart of our homelessness system in that sense, because it really shows kind of where our values are as a community. And so that's what these guiding principles are trying to express in part. When we're trying to think about how to allocate the limited resources we have and trying to make not just like an impact on the individuals we're able to serve with those, but also make a long-term impact in this community and trying to drive down the level of homelessness and trying to drive down the level of acuity we see. That's sort of where these are coming from. And so we do welcome feedback on this because we're you know, we're kind of representing Washtenaw County in this. We want to represent this as well as possible. We want to get this as right as possible because it's really important stuff. So I'm just going to kind of read through some of these. So one is prioritizing housing units for chronically homeless and veteran households. That's really reflective in part of how our you know, resource makeup is there, but it's also kind of this idea in two ways. So on the veteran side, the veteran resource like side, we have like about 23 veterans in our system right now. And the cool thing about our veteran system is because the Veterans Administration has so many resources for people with homelessness, it's actually kind of like a well-funded system. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it's much better than like our our systems for families or individuals. There's enough resources that we're basically able to offer somebody assistance when we identify them as being homeless, which is really different than for other populations where they're put on this by name list and then prioritized and then hoping that something kind of comes up. And so because of that, we're really hoping that veterans can be our sort of test case to end homelessness. If we can get our veteran population kind of consistently down to about 12, we'll have reached what we consider to be functional zero. And that's what I meant before about homelessness being rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. That would basically be a point where we would be confident that the number of veterans coming into our system would be the number of veterans we'd be housing every month. So we basically have a kind of zero gain situation and at a very low level. And we believe if we can do that for veterans, we can use that as a platform to kind of start to figure out solutions for some of our other populations. And prioritizing resources for chronically homeless households is that goal I was talking about earlier of devoting resources and trying to reach those most in need. And then number two is something we call housing first. It's a really important thing. It's kind of a philosophy more than a specific set of policies, although there are policies that support it. And the idea is that if you're experiencing homelessness, you probably have barriers like other things going on in your life. There are other probably issues that you need to address. But Housing First says, we're going to house you no matter what's going on or whether you're engaging with any other issues in your life. We're going to house you because it's going to be easier for you to deal with all other stuff if you have housing. And we actually have a lot of evidence to show that if people are placed in housing, they're able to address those other issues. Medical spending goes down over time. Their ability to engage with treatment goes up and have positive results. There's just all sorts of evidence. And so that's our approach. Like, we don't have preconditions. We're not going to wait until someone has income, for instance, to admit them into a program. We're not going to worry about whether we think someone's ready or willing to engage in a housing search before we offer them a housing resource. We're going to just, when they come up, we're going to give it to them as they kind of come up on our prioritization. We're not going to require people to engage with our shelters or transitional housing or any other community resources. And we're also not going to, not offer a resource because someone hasn't been successful in the past. We're going to give people, repeated opportunities. And so this is the philosophy that's sort of in place across the country. And this is sort of how it bears out in our county. Number 3 is that our goal is always to reduce the length of time people experience homelessness. 4 is that the goal of all of this is all about permanent housing. We're not trying to find temporary solutions. We're not trying to find a couch for people to crash on. We want to get people into permanent long-term housing. 5 is that, our prioritization process is something we develop as a community. We just went through this process this year. We had lots of community input from frontline staff, from various boards and committees, trying to get our community prioritization to reach those goals I've been talking about. And then finally, but I don't know why, for me, this one should almost be number 1. We always want to talk about clients with dignity and respect, obviously, and protect their confidentiality. I guess something has to be last on the list, but that one should be higher up if you ask me. So I'm going to get into a little bit about how we prioritize some of our resources. Are there any questions so far? I've kind of been talking a lot. Hopefully it's all making sense. Great. So for PSH, for permanent supportive housing, for individuals, and that's actually where most of our PSH resources are on the individual side. We do have some for families, but about 80% of our units are for individuals. Number 1 is chronic status. That's actually a little bit non-negotiable by the HUD. They require us to do that. And then VI-SPDAT score is the next set assessment score. We target highest to lowest. Now, we give the assessment out at the very beginning when we first kind of interact with someone. And as we get to know someone, sometimes we learn more about, and understandably, we get to know someone. You learn more about them. You learn more about their circumstances. You might learn, for instance, that some of the ways they answered the assessment or understood the questions they were being asked don't line up with the reality that we understand. And so we do have a process. We have like a subcommittee that kind of meets to raise scores and kind of align them with other people on the list when the score is sort of not reflected. Because we do recognize there are some serious limitations with the VI-SPDAT at times. Then the next 2 are really important also. Within that, so we'll take that like kind of band of the top score. Like, let's say, I want to say we're down to 12 as the high score on our chip list, which is amazing. We used to be at like 17 or 18. We'll take all the people with that high score of say 12. And then if everything else is equal, we jump right down to number 5, length of time homeless, who's been on our list longest. But 3 and 4 are so important. Those are the points at which our committee can say, like, hey, is there someone within this group of scores that, like, we just need to house right now because they're seriously in danger? Like, it's not safe for them to be where they're experiencing their homelessness. Maybe they're currently fleeing DV. Maybe they're sleeping outside and it's freezing cold. We've had, understandably, you could imagine there have been some situations that are more urgent than others that our system comes across. Mental health vulnerability too. There are people who will thrive in housing but can't manage staying in a residential shelter. And so that's something we also consider. And so what we will at times as a committee, generally by consensus, not like by a vote or anything, but we want to kind of, adjust kind of who would be next in terms of number 5, length of time. We might bump someone who's been on the list a little less time, a little higher, just because they're in that like super high at risk. And that's something we really feel is important as a community at times, that we can respond directly to a kind of urgent needs as a system as best we can. Unfortunately, a lot of times those urgent needs arise and we don't have appropriate housing to offer, but sometimes it lines up. Yeah, so that's our policy for permanent supportive housing. For individuals, for families, it looks the same, but we have one slight difference. We have a lot more rapid rehousing for families than we have permanent supportive housing. And it's a little different these days because we've seen a drastic and unfortunate rise in family homelessness. But during the pandemic and a little bit prior, we were really at a point as a system where if you were experiencing homelessness as a family with children, and you kept in touch with our system, we were going to be able to offer you rapid rehab timely manner. Um, and what we were finding is we didn't have a lot of families we could identify as chronically homeless. Families don't often spend significant amounts of time on the streets in one stretch. They're often successful in finding, short-term temporary bits of housing, couch surfing here and there, maybe finding shelter for the kids while the parent stays outside, maybe finding hotels for a short term. But understandably, like there aren't a lot of families meeting that criteria of having a year worth of homelessness out of the past 3. And so we just don't identify that very often. And so number 3 is sort of there to say like, hey, we're going to try to get rapid rehousing to almost everybody as a first kind of wave of resource. Even families that might have a VI-SPDAT score that tell us they're probably going to need permanent supportive housing. And we're not doing this to kind of keep people out of permanent supportive housing. We're doing it just because rapid rehousing is going to come up faster. We don't want to have people just waiting around for a resource that never come. But then we kind of keep this short list of families who we put in rapid rehousing, and maybe we've housed them, and they're not doing so well. Whatever it is, there's a clear need for some sort of ongoing supportive services. They're eligible for PSH because they have a household member with a disability. And then we'll put them kind of on this list. We will also have families we identify as chronic or potentially chronic direct from the CHIP list on there. So it's not exclusionary. And after that, it looks pretty similar. We use VI-SPDAT score and then those vulnerabilities. Next, I'll talk a little bit about rapid rehousing. That's that short-term subsidy. On the individual side, we have just really not very much rapid rehousing, I'm sad to say. And recognizing too that this is the only resource that someone who's an individual, a single adult, or maybe an adult couple without minor children. If you're a single adult in this community and you're not experiencing chronic homelessness, the only resource we could offer you would be rapid rehousing. And so as a result, because of those 2 factors, we just don't have much, and it's the only one. We prioritize people experiencing non-chronic homelessness. And then we also prioritize people who are in the appropriate, kind of rapid rehousing range. Rapid rehousing is sort of geared towards people with sort of mild to moderate needs, not intended for the highest level of needs. That's what PSH is intended for. And then after that, we use like kind of length of time homeless. And then on the family side, this is going to be a little more complicated. So on the family side, what we learned a long time ago is if we just go from VI-SPDAT highest to lowest, like basically like new families kind of keep showing up, and there's families who need the services who are at like, in that rapid rehousing range, who just never ever get picked, and they were sort of waiting forever. And so we switched to this thing where we came up with this sort of this high, medium, low range, and we went kind of high to low in between, and that worked for a while really well, especially during the pandemic when there were lots of additional resources. But we're in this sort of new phase now. It's really unfortunate. And I don't think it's hard to see why, with inflation and the drastic rise in rental prices and everything else, we have this sort of new high in family homelessness. Our system is not, unfortunately, going to be able to serve everyone in the same way we used to. And so we've been wrestling a lot with this question of what does that mean for the family system? What's the fairest way to like allocate resources? And one of the things that really jumped out to the committee, the CHIP committee, as we were considering this, is like there were people on our CHIP list who had been calling Hawk every week and saying they were homeless for more than a calendar year. And everybody sort of had a hard time with that. it just didn't seem like a fair kind of system to be operating. And so what we've done is we still have those three groups, but now we're prioritizing kind of the longest stayer within that group, with the exception of all of those kind of other deals, those vulnerabilities. So if someone within one of those ranges, the high, medium, or low range, was in that very vulnerable state, we would like jump them up. Um, but usually like it's more people are more stable, they're kind of bouncing between homelessness, sometimes being able maybe to stay in a hotel or on a couch, but generally reporting that they're not in a place meant for human habitation. And so we kind of go by the longest stayer within those three ranges. And so that's how we're doing it. This is like a new that we've literally just put this into place in October, at the as of the September board meeting. So we've just been doing this for 2 meetings. We don't know the long-term impacts of the shift, but we're kind of monitoring it. But again, our goal is to sort of allocate this resource fairly. I think this is the last slide. There'll be one more thing I'll talk about. One of the things that happens with CHIP, and this is sort of something that I'm hoping like for the folks who are like kind of leaning in and listening to all this, that you're thinking of clients that maybe you've been working with in your domains that might be eligible. And hopefully this helps you understand a little bit more about like how the homelessness system works, how we allocate resources. But a place that you can help us is documenting people's homelessness. And this is so silly, but like we really have to have documented proof of people experiencing homelessness. We have to verify that people are homeless to serve them. We have to, if you're chronic, we literally have to like map out a history of your homelessness to make sure you meet this definition it's somewhat technical. And we don't have a choice. This is like required by our funders. So, and I'm sure all of you also have silly things you do because of your funders, and this is just ours. If you're working with someone experiencing literal homelessness, as a third party, it is so valuable for our system to have like a letter in hand that says from whoever, just a human with a name at the end that just says, hey, I can verify that this person was sleeping on the street on this night. That is so valuable for us because that is like, we know they're eligible. We have this thing we can point to. This is they were eligible. It's a really helpful thing because sometimes families like call and like obviously they're calling Hawk because they need help, but by the time we get to them, they might not be eligible anymore. We might not be able to verify that they're actually homeless, and sometimes we have to move on to another family because of that. So having documentation can be really helpful. Um, that's the end of my slides. The other thing I want to mention that kind of happens a lot at how do I stop sharing? Where's that little button? Is that the CHIP is also a case conferencing space. So we have all this housing expertise around the table. And what's great about that is we can sort of use that at times. Like if an agency is working with someone and they're feeling stuck in their housing search or whatever, we'll as a group, we'll just like dig into their case. We'll talk about them. We'll ask questions like what's going on? What are the barriers? What have you tried? Have you talked to this person? It's a little like shaking the tree for the community in terms of like what'll happen. But I have seen people move from being stuck to getting housed as a result of this process. So that's the other value of that CHIP committee is not only reallocating resources, but we're touching base as a system in a really kind of community way around every client each time we meet. And that helps us to hopefully move them ahead in a housing process, even for those folks we're not able to offer a permanent resource to. So I think that might be all I have to say. I know this is scheduled till 3, so I can fill like 45 minutes if we want. Uh, but that might be all I have to say. Does anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts? Great.
There's
Hold on.
something in the
I see
chat,
there.
Andrew.
Oh, I didn't see that. I wasn't looking at the chat. Thank you. So bouncing has that. So this is where it gets like really, really tricky. If you're able to stay doubled up with somebody, even if it's like a different house every night, HUD would consider that category 2, which is at risk for homelessness, not category 1, which is literally homeless. And you can find these definitions online. They're sort of explained out. So if you're in a bouncing like couch to couch sort of situation, you'd be more eligible for our prevention resources, which of course had run out for the bulk of the year. I think we've got some more kind of coming in now. But you know, we prefer to try to help folks like that with through like a diversion or a prevention program before they reach that point of like literal homelessness. So if they're reporting to us that they're like sleeping on a couch, we would consider them not homeless at that time because, you know, according again to these HUD definitions. Thanks for that question. And I see Carol's got a hand raised.
Oops, I do. Hi there.
Hi.
I might have missed it, but how does one get referred to this discussion? I mean, is it through the individual?
You know, come to think of it, I'm not sure I mentioned. The way folks get on our list is they call Hawk. And you know, through that process, if they're literally homeless, they'll get a referral either to SOS if they're a family with minor children, or to the Shelter Association for an assessment. And at the point we get that assessment, that's the point we can get them kind of on the CHIP list. Because we're required to use the VI-SPDAT as an assessment tool and required to use it as part of our assessment criteria for how we allocate these, we really can't put someone on the CHIP list until, I mean, we can put their name there, but we can't allocate the kind of housing to them until we have that assessment done. So I believe we were having trouble as a system too. I'll own up to that, getting assessments kind of done. But I believe we're up to like real time right now. Like if you called Hawk and we're needing an assessment, you could be scheduled within 24 to 48 hours at this point.
And just to follow up too, I was curious, is community mental health involved in the roundtable discussion? Are they one of the agencies?
They are through the PORT team, or the PATH, sorry, they don't go by PORT anymore, they go by PATH. The PATH team, which is our street outreach team.
Perfect. We have
so
somebody
yeah, they
that's
definitely
working with
are, and our PATH members are great kind of about accessing and connecting further up to other folks in CMH, kind of acting as a liaison to other folks in CMH.
Yeah, we're working with somebody who's part of the PATH team who would qualify for this. So I like the idea of doing a letter for her. We haven't been asked to do that, but that makes a lot of sense to document her homelessness.
If it and believe me, I wish it were just the case that we could just like take people's word for it and all this stuff.
No,
but like, you know, how they'll come in and slap our hands if we don't have documents for the stuff. But it's really like it's really just I mean, it's kind of a golden ticket. That said, please don't write fake letters. Not saying anybody was thinking about that, but you know, like we don't have enough resources to serve everybody. But you know.
We're a food pantry out in Manchester, and we've delivered food to parks where this person has been, you know, she's in her car.
That would be great. If like that is a great example of like having a letter would be like really, really great.
Yep. So we'll contact her and tell her about that. Thank you.
And then I'm seeing some activity in the chat. So tell us more about prevention and diversion. Yeah, so we've got a couple programs there that are pretty cool. Prevention is like an ongoing service. It's not new to our community, but the idea is if you're in a place where you're imminently about to lose your housing, we're talking like 2 weeks, or you're already in the eviction process, or you're like even experiencing literal homelessness or category 2 homelessness that at risk, and you have a place to move into and you just need a little extra money like to help move in, some move-in costs. We can provide just basic some financial assistance. I believe the cap is at $3,000 per calendar year, so it's not an end all. This is scaled down. Of course, during the pandemic, we had just oodles of cash for this, and we gave out, you know, I want to say close to $22 million in it as a community and rental assistance. That's all gone now, unfortunately. The funding kind of starts in October, so some of the state funding should be back in. Diversion is also a program that's getting up to speed. I don't have all the details about how people get referred to that program either, but the idea of diversion is for folks who are just tipping into category 1 homelessness, or maybe just about to, is can we problem solve with them to figure out kind of like literally any alternative to homelessness, because basically anything's going to be better than homeless. And you know, can we provide a little bit of maybe financial support to help that happen? If you can believe it, we have some local data that suggests like $50 can make the difference between an individual being able to like stay with another household. Like, you know, $50 in grocery support can keep someone housed. That sort of stuff. So the diversion funding program is just getting started at SOS. I don't know how people get referred. I think we're actually looking at some of the folks who've been staying in our hotel program a long time as a pilot for that. Thank you, Elise, for putting in that in chat. I was just getting to that. All of these programs are from Hawk. You get them all through Hawk. And thank you for putting that number, 734-961-1999. So if we're successful in diverting someone, we would not do an assessment, or we would remove them from the list while they were diverted. I mean, obviously, people can move back and forth. I mean, the ideal would be like this is a better alternative than homelessness. If we're able to keep someone doubled up, that's better than someone sleeping in the car. You know, it would mean that they would not necessarily be eligible for some of those other permanent resources. But you know, it's more of a short term. How do we kind of bridge people, you know, ideally to some of the other resources in the community that might help them achieve more stable housing? I see a question from Emily about how many people are on the list. There were 636 people on our CHIP list at the end of September. I'll have the October numbers kind of early in November. 2/3 or so of that are families with children right now. But again, that's like kind of a new trend. I can bring up a little bit of data around that if folks are interested. And then is there another hand raised? I see like a hand. Is it Kalila?
Yes. Hi, Andrew. I have a question. I have a client with a domestic violence case. She's married. She has 6 children. She has tried to get into Safe House. No luck with that. Other shelters, I've been helping her call other shelters in the area, and it's kind of hard for her to get in a shelter with a large family. She is also on the Hawk list, and she's calling every week. And so my question is, she's in between sleeping in the car and in between kind of staying in the house with her husband because she has nowhere to go. So what category would she be considered in? Is that kind of like couching? But
she
she's
would be
sleeping in the
category
car
1
too.
because she's fleeing domestic violence, is what you said, right? Or
Yes,
sorry,
yes.
I'm sorry. She would be called, that's category 4. If someone's like fleeing from domestic violence, they're automatically like eligible for our programs through what's called category 4. So that would be, I should have mentioned that earlier. They're eligible. I'm so sorry. I really wish we had a humane system where we had resources on demand for folks, or a housing market that didn't force people into homelessness at these rates. So I'm just filled with empathy for your client. I wish we could serve them now.
Yeah, she said she's on the Section 8 list, but when she calls, they can't tell her where she's at. And in the
That is also
meantime, she's
true, 'cause,
calling
like,
me every few days, just crying. And I'm just like, how can I get this family housed? She has a job and, you know, she has transportation. She just needs that push. She just needs a place
Yeah,
to stay, you know? Yeah,
I
it's
hear
kind of,
you.
it's the housing situation is just, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, it's out of
It's
control.
really rough here.
It's really rough. Yeah, I know the staff across our system has been really feeling this. Like we want to serve everyone. We want to, we're all in this because we want to see people get housed, and it's tough. I ask your patience with us as the human beings working in the system, but feel free to be impatient about the fact that we don't have enough resources to serve everybody, that rents are out of control, and that nobody seems to be doing anything about all this, because I think there's some justifiable anger out there. But please have patience for us. We're trying to help.
Thank you. Mhm.
Yeah, I wish I could do more. I really do. There was another hand a second ago.
I put it down. It was just following up with Kalila's question and kind of situation with her client. I was wondering if there was like a set protocol for the assessment through Hawk, because I've experienced sitting by a client making a phone call with a similar situation, and they're told, here's the list of subsidized housing and apartments available in Washtenaw County, and they don't even do a full assessment. So I was just wondering what that kind of screening protocol was, and what typically or should happen, or if that's the general experience right now due to limited resources.
So we shouldn't be putting anybody off an assessment for limited resources. Obviously, like the way people, the Hawk screener will move people through kind of our process depends on how they answer the various questions. I am not an expert in that process, so I don't want to answer the question about like how someone might end up getting that response instead of getting scheduled for an assessment. I think it might be, like that could be a topic for a future Barrier Busters meeting, maybe. I just don't have that knowledge at hand. But
Thank you, Andrew.
yeah, we certainly shouldn't be putting, like, we'll still do assessments. We use the assessments to try to keep track of who we know's experience, so we can kind of keep count of all this. And let me bring up just a couple quick slides here about some of our data, just to give people a sense of how we're doing.
Andrew, I have a clarifying question.
Uh-huh.
If you want me to ask that now or after
Yeah, go
this.
for it.
Okay. So I have an individual who has been experiencing homelessness, couch surfing for quite a while. And now the situation is she's staying with a friend that she is being forced to have sex with. So she is
They're
staying there
category 4.
Okay, so would it be appropriate for her to try to reach out to Safe House, or would that, it's not a partner, but
Yeah. So this is where it's really complicated. So that's trafficking, right? I don't know that it would necessarily live up to the legal definition. I'm not an expert there, but we would consider that, like, if someone's in a situation where they're trading sex for a place to stay, we would consider them category 4. Safe House, I believe, only works with people experiencing intimate partner violence, and I want to just say I'm not an expert on Safe House's services, so I'm being a little hesitant. So I don't know the appropriate additional resource, or if one exists in our community.
but regardless, calling Hawk would be the first thing, right? Like that's
Yeah,
the
calling
first.
Hawk, and I'm trying to I'm gonna put my email in the chat. If you could let me know when they're calling, just you don't need to let me know any specific information about the person that could be used to identify them, but I'd like to just give the Hawk staff a heads up to make sure they're clear on if someone is in that situation, that they would be qualified. Because I could see, yeah, I could just see the Hawk staff not recognizing that this was that's not one of our standard kind of flows, if that makes sense. Maybe
Sure.
it should be. So let me put my email in the chat, but I appreciate you asking that question. I'm sure that's happening far more often than any of us would like to think about in our community. So I'll put my email in the chat in a second. But so at the
Thank
end
you.
of September, just to share a little bit about scale, and I'll show kind of what this looks like. We had 636 people experiencing homelessness. That's up 70% from last year. This is actually like the amount it's gone up is starting to decrease now, because we're finally kind of catching up to what's like a new normal. But June 2022 was a system low for us. We had about 240 something, 260 something. I can't remember exactly right now, but it was like an all-time low for us. That was the end of the eviction moratorium for those keeping score. It's also when inflation started to kick into high gear. And so we've seen this sort of insane growth just over the past year and a quarter. So far this year, we've housed 317 people permanently. You can see that if we were able to just do that overnight, that would still be only about half our list. And that's down a little bit since September of last year. It's like for 2022 through September. And it's taking us about 5% longer from intake from that assessment to finding permanent housing. And that's just for the folks obviously we're able to house, which is not everybody. And you know, nobody likes sitting at this high, but that's almost 6 months. This is a long time for someone to be homeless and waiting for a resource. This is sort of what this looks like numerically. This is measured in people, not households, but you can see what I said about 2/3. This blue chunk, this is families with children, and that's about 2 out of 3 people in our system right now. The next biggest population, this yellow bar, are non-chronic single adults. And as I mentioned, like, we don't have a lot of resources. We have maybe 12 slots of rapid rehousing, maybe. So while we have this kind of, there are them, and then we have like our kind of smaller group of chronic homelessness, and then this is about 20, the veterans here at the bottom. So I'm not going to go into a ton of data because that's not what the presentation's about, but I just kind of wanted to share a little bit to give people a sense of what our system is. And let me put my email in the chat. I really, really do appreciate all the conversations, the questions and comments. It's really great. I know there's like a lot of mystery about the HAWC processes, and help take the lid off the black box and help people understand kind of what it is we're doing. So if anyone has any other questions or anything, I just put my email in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me. Happy to help as much as I can. And that includes questions about eligibility and things like that. The only thing I can't do is talk specifically about someone's case without, you know, the old release. Oh, thanks, Emily. I just saw you put it in for me. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Andrew. Alrighty, I will go ahead and end us out with a funding update for Barrier Busters. So right now, there's still not any Washtenaw County general funds. Ypsilanti Township funds, there's 33,000. And again, I know that an email went out from Moonson about this, but it is being divided on a monthly basis just to try to spread out the funding there. You can double check the map Washtenaw to make sure that your client is within Ypsilanti Township. We are out of Ann Arbor City funds, so that has gone away now. And then we do have the Ann Arbor Water Utility Assistance that's still rolling. Sorry, whoops, for a total of just the 33,000 that's within Ypsilanti Township. Any questions for me regarding the Barrier Busters or funding that I hopefully can answer for you?
Hey, Emily, is there ever a conversation about updating that Encompass system? Because the biggest issue I have is if I don't go into it for a period of time, it like I can never get in because my password is like off, and I always have to email you guys to get a new password. And I'm just wondering, like, is there any conversation? I'm sure there's no resources for it, but I'm just asking.
We do have a new system that is going to be launched within the next couple months is our hope. We have not received a final launch date for our Barrier Buster staff to play around with it yet. We were hoping that was going to be in November. I think it's being pushed to December. So right now the conversation is that by the end of Q1 of 2024, we're hoping to have this out to the community. This obviously would require a new training for everyone to go through because it's going to be a whole new system. So what the details of that looks like as far as right now, I don't know, and I don't know an exact date, but they have started already the process of switching us over to something a little bit more user-friendly. Overall, I've not seen it yet, but a lot of the concerns and a lot of the problems that we've been running into and our outdated Encompass website right now, those will all be taken care of with the new site. We're very happy for it. Makes everybody's life a little bit easier.
Yeah, and Emily, just one other quick question. I know there was a survey out about having maybe some in-person Barrier Busters meetings. Are there any updates about potentially having some in-person meetings?
There is not an update yet. This week has been super busy. So it's on my calendar to look through the survey next week early. And then we should be reserving. I think regardless, we're going to still offer it, but we'll still be planning on streaming through Teams again. So anyone who wants to join virtually will have that option. But as far as, I think it's going to start probably sometime next year again. And we'll just have the option for both for individuals. We just needed to know how many rooms to reserve in the LRC. But I'll send an email out when that final update happens and if we start reserving rooms.
I have a question about the Ypsilanti Township money. So it said that a smaller portion is being reserved for eviction prevention, and that has to go through Hawk. Is there anyone, like, what's that process? What's the turnaround time looking like to do that right now? And do they have to do a full Hawk assessment, or is it something different?
Yes, it is the same still Hawk assessment where they call intake. They have to wait to be put on an appointment. And then whenever they are in contact with an SOS caseworker, if they are eligible for the funds, then the caseworker at that time will determine, and then they would submit their own barrier buster request for that funding. I know right now they have a little bit of other funds that are a little bit more general wide use that they're trying to utilize beforehand, if they're able to, because it's a little quicker. But yeah, there's no way to kind of like push them up. All rental and, security deposit requests have to go through Hawk. And I know right now appointments are out a little bit past November 9th, so which makes it a little difficult, but does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And so then SOS would route it through Barrier Busters to request the money.
Correct, themselves,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Alrighty, well, I'll give everyone 20 minutes back of their time for the day. I will send out the final slides. I know that our agenda had kind of changed, so I'll send out an email today or tomorrow with the presentation slides and a link to our Barrier Buster website where you're able to find what was presented today, as well as the meeting recording that will be uploaded to YouTube. And then if you have any questions, feel free to use our Barrier Buster staff email. Just as a reminder, the single L-BB staff email should be inactive. So if you have a question, make sure that you're emailing it to the DL-BB staff. Otherwise, enjoy your guys' Wednesday. Thank you all for attending.